so and even in theater, like when I was going to school for theater, I was always drawn very much to like darker, non-funny things. But I think because I'm so drawn to like everything dark, everything creepy, that I have to counterbalance it with being like Lucille Ball of the time. I'm like goofy, funny, but then my books are, very dark, very depressing. It's a lot of grief horror and trauma horror. And
Trauma
yeah.
horror, you just went like your eyes got big. So, define, yeah, this is interesting. Define, your take on trauma horror. Like,
So far, I mean, a psychological trauma horror, I'll say, like, so dealing with the ramifications of like an abusive relationship or childhood abuse, or even like being emotionally abused, being neglected, things like that. So it's that kind of trauma. I try not to do too much with physical trauma, even though the book I'm writing right now does have more to do with physical trauma, just because I have a squeamish stomach and I have a hard time writing really gross things.
yeah. Well, I mean, we balance it with the
But
story, right? I mean,
yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, so like I'll write about somebody who's like been in a car accident and they're disabled. So in my book Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, the core story of that is about a man who's lost his wife and his young son in a car accident, and his grief over that doesn't really allow him to move on with his life. And you find out that it's tied to, he has psychological scars from his childhood, um, and all of that shapes him as a character. So he becomes like a very broken but well-rounded person going into something that's quite horrific, which is like this crazy haunted island with a manipulative ghost and a elderly
That
murderer.
I love that. I love that. So I think this, and I've noticed this with a lot of other authors that I've had, and maybe you probably see this too, but the open talk about mental health, that just is happening now, and we're going to see the mental health effects of COVID. I'm already seeing it on the younger generation. We're going to see that
Yeah.
for years. So it's no surprise that more heroes and heroines and main characters are dealing with these issues, and it's just more
Yeah.
talked about. So these these had to be rooted in your characters for, a strong reason. I feel like it was a
Yes.
necessary conversation that had to
It
be.
is a necessary conversation. And again, I think a lot of it, as a pantser, as you know, I don't always know what the heck is going to happen. Like I go into a story knowing the beginning, roughly knowing who the characters are, maybe knowing the like something that the thing that happens in the middle that changes everything, and then I sort of know the end. But as I'm writing, I'm developing these characters more and more, and then they start telling me the story. So that's when I'm like, oh, this took a turn. Oh well, like
This is what they wanted to say.
this is what they wanted to say.
I'm a firm believer that you have to let your characters tell you the story. For a longest time, I was a rigid plotter because I'm a Capricorn, and I like.
I was just gonna ask what sign you were.
Yeah, no, that's what I have other Capricorn guests who are like, oh, me too. How many spreadsheets do you have? Like we're just like crazy. But I noticed that my endings suck when I just rigidly plot them. Uh,
Right.
and I wasn't listening to my characters enough. And I think you have to give your character space. And if your character, and I feel like that's what you're doing to open up this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, there was a specific moment when I was writing Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent. I remember this so clearly because my main character, Adam, I love him. He broke my heart. It's like he's imaginary. I'm in love with him. My husband knows that
Book
I'm in love with
boyfriend.
my
Yeah.
book boyfriend. And he'd be a bad book boyfriend too, because he's completely emotionally unavailable. He's being haunted by like several people, literally and figuratively. Um, but he made a decision in Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent that I didn't expect at all for him to make. And I was typing and I was screaming, like, you're making the wrong beep, like lots of swears, choice. I was so mad. And my husband came in because he heard me like screaming, and he's like, what is wrong with you? He assumed I saw a spider. a mouse. And I said, Adam just made the worst decision of his life. And my husband's like, well, you wrote it. Like, you can delete it. And I'm like, I can't delete it. It's on the page.
Well,
He
it's
did
who he
it.
is. It's who he is
It's who
now.
he is. Yeah.
Your husband's
I was
not a
like, yeah, I could
writer.
delete it. No, no. I mean, dabbles a little, but not very much. He is a musician and a dancer.
Well, because it's like, just delete it. You're like, you don't understand. I got to
I know,
this point.
exactly. Like, even if I delete it, I still know he made that decision. And he's going to remember making that decision eventually. And
Yeah, it can't be undone, damn it.
it
That's
cannot be
crazy.
undone.
What if you had not just your husband, but like an editor that maybe told you to change that? What would have, like,
Oh,
no?
you know, that specific thing I think would have been a deal breaker because it actually went on to shape the second half of the book. But when I was shopping around Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, I got some great reception to it. I did get one note from an editor who was like, we loved the book, loved it. We want it. Here's the thing. Adam's not likable. He needs to be kind of funny. Can you make him funny? Or like, and I was just like, but his kid who was 4 just died, and so did his wife. He's like, I know that, but like he could like crack some jokes sometimes. And I'm like, that's actually not his personality at all. And I'm open to notes because I've gotten notes from my beta readers and I take them. But that I was just like, it went completely against who the character was inside from his childhood up until this tragedy. I was like, so you want my character who just attempted suicide to be cracking jokes to
Who lost
why?
his
And
wife and
wife and
child.
son. Yeah. Yep.
And it's
Cracking
a
jokes. And I'm
horror
like,
novel.
it's a horror novel. So you want him to be, it's not Shaun of the Dead. Like, I love funny horror, but this was not the book.
Yeah, they're fired.
Yeah. So
That
I did
that
not go with that publisher.
Oh, what a nightmare. First off, I mean, shoot, kudos to that. I mean, don't for not I mean, that's like not selling out to the fullest.
Yeah.
Wow, that's insane. That's just like that just overall, you know what that sounds like? That sounds like a writer's room in Hollywood, actually. We
Yeah.
we like this, but
Yeah.
one change, and you're like,
Like one change. Instead of it being a guy, it's a lesbian woman. And instead of being human, she's from Mars. Huh? And you're like, how is that my book? Like,
yeah, but so your reader, you've listened to the readers, which is important because that's the audience, right? And
yes.
you ended up getting a multitude of awards, and even your even a writing teacher that you were with loved the book. So I
I
feel
know
like that's
Diane
the
Zinna.
feedback.
I know Diane Zinna, for anybody who's watching this, she wrote my favorite book of the year and probably in my top 5 favorite books of all time. It's called The All Night Sun. It is breathtaking. Every page of that book I wanted to cry. It's so beautiful. She's also a wonderful creative writing teacher. I just started taking classes with her, but she was on my show and we hit it off. And then she said, oh, I bought your book. And like inside, I was like, I'm going to throw up. What if she hates it? And she didn't hate it. And
She didn't hate it. She
she
loved
didn't
it.
hate it. She loved it. And she was very sweet. She would like screenshot the quotes that she loved so much and like texted them to me like randomly during her reading process. Like, this part right here is, this is how I feel about it. This part right here. And it was it's so validating. It's validating to hear good things from anyone. But then when you hear good things from somebody that you have on like this pedestal, like hovering way up over here, and that was amazing. That and like, yeah, the awards have been shocking and beautiful.